Here's another question because I've never been a president of a country. Kuli, I don't know if you have.
What?
Oh, so, what's the biggest misconception people have about your role as a president of a nation?
Uh, it's hard for me to say. I think at one time, in coming close to the end of my presidency in 2014, because when I was president of Guyana, it was a very difficult period.
Welcome to the Global Indian Podcast. This is episode 2. And if that small snippet doesn't inspire you, then there's something totally wrong. Yes, in this episode, we have the privilege, Kulvinder and myself, to speak with a president of an entire nation, this small little country called Guyana, that's nestled between Venezuela and Brazil, that's got an incredible community of people of Indian origin. So stay tuned, listen to the music, and enjoy this riveting conversation, because I can guarantee you it is going to blow you away.
Get up and just move. 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 Get up and just.
Exciting, isn't it? Okay, so welcome to the Global Indian Podcast. In this conversation we'll be having a real deep discussion. We'll be traveling all the way over towards the Caribbean to a country that is nestled between Brazil and Venezuela, where the discussion of identity is more pertinent than ever before. But it's not just me and my trusted partner in crime, Kulvinder here. We're also going to be joined by a man who needs no introduction. But just to make sure that we're whetting the appetite even further, he is the former president of Guyana. He stepped down in 2015. He's been a very strong supporter of the Global Indian series, having written an article next to Sashitaro in our motor feature, and he's been a custodian to what it means to be liberal and to live in an open economy. It's my privilege, and that of Kulvinder, to introduce to you His Excellency, the former president of Guyana, Donald Ramotar. How are you doing, Donald? Are you well?
I'm okay, thanks. And so I'd like to say hello to your listeners and to be clear how happy I am to exchange some views with you.
That's great, Donald. I can't wait.
Donald, thank you for joining in. I think what the most fascinating thing is obviously you're a person of Indian origin, and you reached the pinnacle of anybody's political career by being a president and a residing person of an entire nation. So I suppose the first question is that me and Kuli were wondering is, what got you into politics? What drew you within this type of line of thought?
Well, I was born at a time in Guyana when the political situation was pretty heightened. It was a time when the fight for independence had actually started. Actually, to the same year that the party to which I belong to, the People's Progressive Party, led by Dr. H.E was one of the leading anti-colonial fighter for independence in the whole world at that time, because he was very, very famous and in the world as a prominent national liberation fighter.
Well, so that it would have been highly intense then. And how old were you when you actually started your political career?
My first memories of getting actively involved in politics, I was quite young. My father also was a strong supporter of the party, the People's Progressive Party, and he campaigned for the party from the very beginning when it started. But I remember my earliest memory, I remember being part of the campaign in 2014 in the area that I was born, which is a near interior area of the then British Guyana.
Donald, have you ever done that kind of tree where you actually go back and actually see where your origins have come from?
Not in any detailed way, but I do know that I think we came from Uttar Pradesh.
Okay.
Not the Uttar, the next state next to Uttar Pradesh, Bihar.
Bihar.
I think my family came from Bihar. My great grandparents came in 1876.
Wow.
In the then British Guyana.
As indigenous workers.
They were attached to my great grandfather was attached to an estate on the east bank of the Essequibo, a place they call Philadelphia. And my great grandmother was attached to another estate on the West Demerara. a place they call heartfelt. That's a Dutch name that gives you an idea of the influences that Guyana had. First, we were colonialized by the Dutch, and then
Wow.
we changed hands several times, French sometimes, and then eventually became a British colony in 1804.
And
Okay.
there's been one thing that was really interesting when I met with Donald, it was, I think, 4 years ago, and then more so recently, was that you got this really rich cultural heritage of people of Indian origin. But your take of Indianness is slightly different from other nations. What role did that play in your upbringing, for example? What did it mean to be a person of Indian origin?
Well, I would say that in the people of Indian origin in Guyana, they work very hard, try their best to try to integrate, to have unity within their society. We did have some problems that was not caused by anyone in particular. It just so happened in history that after indentureship was finished, most of the Indians could not get jobs into the state apparatus because those jobs were filled, and many of them, because of discrimination against Hindus and Muslims, could not could not get jobs in teaching profession, in the nursing profession. At that time, you had to be a Christian to get jobs in those areas. And also, as
What?
far as work was concerned, Indians who went into agriculture went fundamentally into rice farming and cattle rearing, while the African Guyanese who went into agriculture were in pig rearing and provision farming, which were different kind of structures, different kind of environment area to make those things profitable. So there was some natural kind of division within the society where you had some black areas and predominantly Indian areas and so forth.
I was gonna say, and then obviously when you got into became the president of the country, and I remember one of the main things that you were looking to do was look at the foundations of social cohesion and to ensure that the whole country moved forward together. Was that a difficult task to do?
It was, to my mind, it's not such a difficult task, but it is made difficult by people, in particularly those in the opposition, who try to use ethnicity as a factor in politics. But if you look at our society from the objective point of view, there is really no strong reason to have strong racism here because of the economic circumstances of people are more or less the same. It is true. It is true that the majority of rich people in Guyana are of Indian origin, but the vast majority of Indian people are also just workers and farmers and ordinary people. And they live on a kind of a same level as African Guyanese and so or the rest of the population, with the exception of the native Indians, who their economic position is a little bit much more difficult than the people who live on the coastline.
How do you rise that social difference then? If it's not in, if
I
it,
think the big difficulty with that difference is the fact that as I mentioned, the opposition, particularly the second largest party in the country, the People's National Congress, it is one of their main. It is one of the main things that they use for a political organization, and that has a long history in itself, which I don't think that one such program as we have will allow me to elaborate. But it has its origins in the time of colonialism, when the fight started for independence in the country. The British used the fact that we were a very multi-ethnic society to try to divide the people of the country, to weaken the national movement in the fight for independence in our country. And they encouraged it. They looked for one of because Dr. Jagan was such a forthright, principled anti-colonial fighter who was not satisfied with anything less than independence for the then British Guyana, that they looked for a African Guyanese, which is the next large group within the country, and more or less compromised them and created division in the ranks of the movement. And they actually created the People's National Congress, whose head was one Forbes Bonham, was the head of that party, and he allowed his party to be used as an instrument to fight against independence in the then British Guyana.
Well, here's a question, because identity politics has been something that's been used by the political parties over and over again. But then when we have a look at it, we've seen that international countries, all whom have embassies in Guyana, been silent over that fact.
First of all, I wouldn't say that ethnic politics was used by the political parties. As I mentioned just now, it was used fundamentally by the People's National Congress.
Yeah.
And it is true that our party, the People's Progressive Party, is the vast majority of its supporters are Indian Guyanese, but it's not solely only Indian Guyanese. In fact, this last election, which very clearly won, which is right now in dispute, not really in dispute, which the Elections Commission and the PNC tried to steal, and that we are working hard to block that at this very moment as we speak. The PPP could not win those elections if they did not get crossover votes from African Guyanese and from the native Indian Guyanese, Amerindian Guyanese. So I think it's simplistic for many people who look at our politics overseas, many commentators who look at our politics simplistically say that African Guyanese supports the People's National Congress and Indian Guyanese support the PPP. And then based on that type of analysis, they talk about our race-based politics. But I ask a simple question is, why should an Indian Guyanese not support the PPP? I don't see any reason why they should not, because the policies of the PPP have been geared fundamentally to help the poor, to eradicate poverty, to give equal opportunities to all. And even in the term, because of the state and level of the development of our country, we have created the environment for business to strive. And we give support to local business. Sometimes we try to give local business the edge over international business. That's also a difficult task in our time when you have the World Bank, IMF, and so forth to deal with. But there is absolutely no reason for an Indian Guyanese to be against the PPP. And there's absolutely no reason why African Guyanese should not be in the PPP even more than we have them at this point in time, but only because of the question of the ethnic politics of the People's National Congress.
Yeah.
But to talk about some of these things that have been happening here, it is true that since the Indians arrived in British Guyana in 1838, since they arrived in British Guyana in 1838, they arrived here just at the end of slavery, and their conditions were no better than the slaves. In fact, I think it was better for the plantation, more cheap for the plantation to run an indentured system than it was for them to run a slave system. Because here they were paying Indian Guyanese, they had them under contract for 5 years, paying them pittance as salary, which was probably cheaper than the food that they had to provide for the slaves during the time of slavery, and they exploited them. So I would say without doubt that since Indians arrived in British Guyana in 1838, they have been the most exploited in the country, and they have been most discriminated against. And even today, that discrimination on Indians continue in a very big way. It's very disappointing that many countries, India included, that went through similar type of anti-colonial struggles, and many of them are not speaking out of what is taking place in Guyana.
Guyana's done something incredibly well that a lot of other countries haven't been able to do, which is that not only does it have religious tolerance, but it has real cohesion. What lessons can countries like India and other countries out there learn from Guyana's ability to almost mend and bridge?
I would say fundamentally that the state should keep out of religion. We should have a real separation of the state from the religious organization. The religious organization must be given all the freedom to develop and to develop themselves, but there should be distinction between the state and the religious bodies, and they should all be treated equally. I think it is that policy that we have in Guyana that has allowed us to really enjoy a very high level of cohesion and understanding of religious freedom and religious practices. and the lack of prejudice for people of different kind of religions. I mean, let me use myself as an example. I come from a pretty large family, and we are 6 brothers. That 2 of us are married to Hindu girls, 2 are married to Muslim girls, and 2 are married to Christian girls. And we are not unique in Guyana in that regard. I have friends, many friends, who are mixed from the point of view of religious, who are in mixed marriages in that way. And nobody sees that as anything abnormal. A Muslim can walk into a Hindu temple and sit down, and Hindu can go in. You will see in Guyana, if you drive along our coast in particular, you will see Hindu temples and Muslim mosques side by side in some areas. And you will see, sometimes you will see all 3 mosques, temples, and churches, all side by side. And nobody sees that as anything. It is seen in Guyana as being very normal in our society. But I think fundamentally, it's because of the fact that religion was allowed to develop freely without interference. It had to be a struggle too, because as I said, in the colonial period, Christianity was given some amount of preference. But it is fundamentally through the efforts of the PPP that we had religious separation, teeth.
As one professional to another, obviously your counterparts in different countries, what would be your message to them? Because obviously, there's a joke in the feature that we had from H.E He said at one point, NRIs were almost seen as the non-required Indians, and now it's the National Reserve of India. And so he says, do you feel that our experiences and what we've achieved should be a life lesson for where India is now heading?
Let me try to be careful with what I say here, but I would say that I would hope India will take a similar policy, a similar position that we have taken, because it has shown that it has enhanced the relations between people. It goes a far way to help feeling of togetherness and make them focus on things that are really important to their lives, how they can improve their lives, and so on and so forth. And I also believe that India's achievements since independence has been great. I mean, that cannot be denied. But I think its biggest contribution that it can make to struggles of ours, where you have Indians in the diaspora, is to try to, one, within their own society, create the atmosphere where people of all, with whatever distinctions they have, either religious distinction or whatever distinctions they have, that they should be able to see themselves as Indians, first and foremost, and as Hindu Indians and Muslim Indians and Christian Indians and so forth as secondary. I think that would be a great contribution to be made to help to unite the diaspora to look up more to India for what they have been doing.
Yeah, well, it's strange, see, because, from such a great democracy in that sense, that holds so many different cultures, and yet it's been known for its tolerance. And yet it's a lot of people that it holds, and yet in its ideas of its nationalist movements, I think India has to go through all this at the moment and to form that, and hopefully go back to its original ideas of origins when there was no borders, and there was. You're absolutely. I'm with you, Donald, when you say, take that God and take it home with you and let it be inside you and let it live there and make it so private. It should be yours and personal, and it shouldn't necessarily mix with the state and the idea of humanity in that way. And hopefully all paths lead that way anyway.
Yeah. That is one of the reasons that I respect and reverence to somebody like Pandit Nehru, who I think was the man who was bigger than India in a way, that his stature was more like a third world champion, a champion for justice in the world, a champion for that image that he gave India is lost. And I think it's practically, well, I don't know if it's lost completely, but it is not being seen in the same way.
Well, it's ingrained, nicely, it's ingrained in yourself and it's ingrained in me.
Yeah.
So, so it can't be lost.
There
So
you
let's
go.
not lose it, and I think in that respect, it is an etching in that side where India, what India is and what India has as an identity. But at the same time, the admiration of how you talk about a nation that is unique in itself, that's as a state that just puts those identities of cultural or religious at one side and says, actually, those are personal things that you have to work on.
I'm going to say, Donald, what's your biggest fear for the country of Guyana and importantly, the everyday citizens there? Because you have got the world's largest oil find in the last 3 decades. It's a huge opportunity for Guyana to take itself from the grass position to grace.
Well, I would say this: if we do not get this right at this point in time, if we do not get a government that is elected from a properly free and fair and transparent election, because in Guyana the election itself was very good. The election day itself was very good. Everything went peaceful and very well. The problem started when the governing party realized that they were losing the election and they made an attempt at the count to try to steal the elections. And they did that in the presence of the international community. They've been here in Guyana, and the observers that were here from the European Union, from the Commonwealth, from the Carter Center, from CARICOM, from the OAS, all of them saw that. So I think it's important for us to get, first of all, to install a democratic government, because history has shown us that despite the fact that we have been blessed with a lot of natural resources, that by itself would not bring prosperity to the people and end some of the poverty that we have. That they just as important is a democratic political framework where the economy can actually be freed up and allowed to grow, and so that we can satisfy a lot of the needs, the economic needs, the cultural needs, the all the needs of our people, to join the rest of the international community as a free nation where our people can blossom out and their talents emerge.
What do you think is your movement going to be for the next 2 years?
Well, it's first of all, I mean, the most immediate task we're facing right now, the immediate task is to ensure that these elections are not stolen. These elections have been completed since March. They were conducted on March 2nd of this month. And this is the last day of the month, and the result has not yet been given. Some of these matters are tied up in court. It's a little bit complicated, but I think that with the very fact that these things happen in front of the eyes of the international community, and they all see what is happening and the support that they're giving us, I am pretty confident that we will get these elections announced with the proper winner, and then we can probably move on to start to build our country.
We're people of Indian origin, so that means in the countries that we call home, either in Guyana, Kenya, UK, or Philippines, we're not waving the flag of India. We're waving our flag as saying our ancestry is there, but we're proudly placed here. But what we do have is almost those life lessons to each other. So I suppose the question that I would have then is, having a look at the way forward, it is coming down to if India's supposed to mean something to us, surely we should mean more to India than the other way around. We left many generations.
Yes. Absolutely. I agree with that.
And so when you won that award, did you win that award because you were a person of Indian origin, or did you win that award because India can learn something from your experiences of reaching those upper echelons in those countries, and they should be celebrating those learnings that you have? They can benchmark up and say, hey, we can institute Donald Ramotar's vision as a president of his country towards helping India grow that extra bit further.
What I believe is that we in the diaspora are also proud of the achievements of India in many fields, in science and technology, and the fact that, and also we are proud that the Indians in the diaspora, many of them have done well. I mean, look at what is in the United States, in different places, the high position they hold I think India could be proud of the achievement of the diaspora in the different parts of the world and the contribution that it has made towards development of the various society. But we are also proud of the achievements of India, even though we are no longer Indians and we are Indian origin now, but we are no longer Indian in the classical sense of the word.
Well, I hope so, because, I was in the idea very much brought up as a non-required Indian. And only recently, only recently, getting to know more Indians coming over here and coming to see how things are working out, getting to know people. You've slowly been seeing how people communicate and work. So India's, I think, is learning itself to be open, to have an understanding of what that diaspora was about and because in one sense we were thrown into the deep end.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet there was very little kind of lifelines or any kind of floating bits were there to give survival.
Yeah.
Even when the Ugandans came in, they said, the Indians said, we don't want anything to do with it.
Right.
So and that makes it quite unique for that diaspora who carries on moving on and moves on into another culture and one into another. And that's unique, because each time what we're doing is we're creating bridges. So our jobs become as communicators of saying, actually, this is how this place communicates, and this is how this place communicates. And if you guys can meet in the middle and have an understanding, you can actually have a really, really, you can start get rid of that ignorance and start learning about each other a little bit more, because this is what I've learned from here. Yeah. So you say as a society, we can only give choices. And yet those choices are to enhance that society as well. And it feels like, Guyana is your midnight's children.
Yeah. So I was going to say, what's the biggest misconception people have about Guyana?
I would say, as I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, the question that our politics is just race, ethnic politics. I don't think that is that anyone who takes that view would not be having or put it there, they'll be having a distorted picture of what is taking place now.
Actually, here's another question, because I've never been a president of a country. Kuli, I don't know if you have. So what's the biggest misconception people have about your role as a president of a nation?
It's hard for me to say. At one time, in coming close to the end of my presidency in 2014, when I was president of Guyana, it was a very difficult period.
Yeah.
The 2011 elections, I was elected president, but I had a minority in the parliament.
Yeah.
And I had hoped that would have allowed us to work with each other better and bring us together in a way. I didn't see that as the end of the world when that had happened. I thought that it was an opportunity for us to work. And I even pointed out in my first speech in opening the new National Assembly, while we have a minority, the experience of minority parliaments in the various parts of the world is different. That some areas have been very successful and have a lot of achievements to its name, and in some areas it has not example. And therefore, I said then that how much we will achieve will be dependent on us ourselves. Unfortunately, the worst happened in the sense that the opposition used their one-seat majority in the National Assembly not to promote development, but to try to use it to stymie any type of development. For instance, they voted against our anti-money laundering bill, which was an international requirement. And the whole idea of that was to put us in problems with the international community. It was a direct attack on our financial system, period. And so when they passed a no confidence motion against me in 2014, what had happened was a smaller party in the then opposition that proposed the no confidence motion. And I prorogued the parliament. My whole intention at that time was to give ourselves an opportunity to cool off and to talk and to see if we can find arrangements where we can move on with the country. But after 3 months, when I realized that the parliament was prorogued for 3 months, and when the end of the 3 months, it was very clear that they were not willing to talk, I called an elections. But during that 3 months, I came under enormous pressure from the international community who were saying that I prorogued the parliament, and maybe they were even hinting that what I did, even though the Canadian Prime Minister prorogued his parliament more than 4 times, they never said anything to him about that, but they were saying to me that I was doing something that was undemocratic. But
Yeah.
it was constitutional. I never did anything that was illegal. I lived up to my oath of upholding the Constitution, and what I did was legal and was constitutional, and I did not abuse them.
Donald, would you say that you're a typical politician? Because, it reminds me of a scene from Yesminster, saying politicians lie. He goes, no, we don't lie. We just tell untruths. I suppose you're very frank in your conversations with everybody, but that doesn't necessarily seem like a typical politician, at least from my experience of being in the UK and other countries that we've been in.
Yeah, I in a way, to some way, we would say that I resent the talk that people keep repeating, that politicians are crooks and vagabonds and liars and so forth. Like every profession, I think politics is a noble profession, and I believe that it has to have ethics. And morality must be part of politics. And to me, to lie to your population, to deliberately mislead your population, is not politics. People say that it's politics. It's criminal to do things like that. I have always been moved. All my politics has been, all my life that I've been involved in politics, the underlying factor was how we can improve the life of people and how we can develop our country better. Those were the only thing that motivated me in my long life in politics.
What inspired you? What gets you up in the morning to say, I want to take on this fight? Because I can imagine at times, especially when you did the whole Parliament Parole, when you had the issues in 2015, that it would have been just easy for you to say, hands up, hat off, I'm no longer participating.
Yeah.
What's
I can't do that. I mean, of course, after 2015, it was not an easy period because, as I said, a lot of things happened, and I felt somehow that these things should not have happened. A lot of people were depending on me to move things forward and so forth. And after we didn't succeed in that elections, and the massive dismissal of ordinary people, I'm not speaking about people at the top, but cleaners, drivers, chauffeurs, those type of people who were dismissed from their employment, the kind of discrimination that many of them had to face, and the difficulties many had to face, and so forth. And not only Indian Guyanese faced that, many of our African Guyanese also faced that. For instance, in a village in a part of our country that is called Borbis, I had given farmers, landless farmers, I had given them land. And just because it was me who gave them land, the present government, when they came to government in 2015, they took away the people land from them. And we had in opposition to fight to keep, so that the black farmers could keep their land on the West Borbis issue. So I would say this, that I am motivated by the fact that, one, I know that our country can have a very bright future, and I would like to be part of the whole process of being part of creating the atmosphere, the conditions for us to develop our country in a better way. And also discrimination and injustice actually really turns me off, and I can't stay quiet while I have a voice as former president of the country. If it means anything, I have to raise my voice against these things.
Because you have been a staunch fighter towards equality, and a lot of people have almost observed, and in some cases looked towards criticizing it, but it's a very noble thing, because you said something that Kulli always mentioned, unless we all win, I don't win. And you've almost taken that viewpoint, but you brought it in place in Guyana.
It's not only me, but I think I was fortunate. I think I was very fortunate to have worked closely with Dr. H.E Jagan. And I think that this was his motivation as well. So he had given our party a strong groundings, strong roots, anti-racial, democratic. He used to say that you cannot have any sustained social and economic development without political democracy. And I strongly believe that. I very strongly believe that no matter how much we possess as far as natural resources is concerned, we will not be able to fulfill fullness of our country's potential once we do not have freedom and equal opportunity for everyone in the society to play their part.
Here's a question, if you don't mind me being very candid, Donald, and do you
Yeah.
promise to answer it honestly?
If I have the answer, yes.
All right. So obviously you're a man of the world. You've seen a lot of different countries out there, and you got a deeper understanding politically about what's going on behind countries than most. Which country right now would you say you'd want to become president of, and why? Apart from your own.
Okay. I haven't really thought about it,
Oh, yeah.
No, really, no, it's true. I never really, but I think there's some countries that are trying to do things. For instance, Bolivia was doing very well under Morales. I thought that his removal properly done, that he was removed. I think this country could have achieved much more. He too should have lived up to the agreement that he had. And if they had term limits, he should have stepped down at the time when his term limits, and he still could have a role to play in the development of this society, and not necessarily to want to cling on to power. I thought maybe that the vast majority, the majority of people in Bolivia are native Indian people in Bolivia who have been living under very poor conditions, and under his regime, he was able to get them to make great strides. And I would like to be part of that kind of process to help people to be
Okay,
able
well, then this is true. Which country in the world right now would you say, if I was offered to become head of state there's not a chance for any amounts of roti or anything else out there that I'll take that role?
That is also a difficult question, in the sense that if the country is doing so bad, I would like to take it over to try to make it better. In the sense of when I see what is happening to the Palestinian people as a result of the Israeli discrimination, which is something worse than apartheid, I could easily say, I could say frankly, I would not want to be part of that government if that policy remains in place. But surely I would like to take over that country to change the policy so that we can give the Palestinian people an opportunity to straighten their backs and to live like normal human beings.
Kuli, what about you? If you could take any country on to become the head of state, which country would it be for you?
Oh God, I'll take.
I would take the United States. Because it has a lot of resources. It has a lot of resources.
Yeah.
It has tremendous possibilities for good. And I think that I would love to be president of the United States, to have at my disposal the kind of resources that they have at their disposal in order to make a big difference, not only in the United States, but in the world.
I think if I could get into Russia.
Okay, interesting.
I think if I can get into Russia, and we've got Donald on that side.
Yes, we can solve the world's problems.
I think we could do a lot more. We could achieve more and put, and whether that's anything to do with the India diaspora, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, actually, do you know
they're
what?
sort of in the middle.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? It's here's another thing, because you lived and you knew H.E Jagan incredibly well. Is that right, Donald?
Yeah, very well. Yeah.
What was his motivating factor? Because this is a person who, unfortunately, the world doesn't know enough about. But yet he fought some of the biggest battles, and he fought for independence. He fought against injustice. But almost it's been a quiet blip across the world's political and historical nature.
I would say that he was really an example. I think he's a good role model for anyone to follow. He had not a racist bone in his body. He had a very strong feelings for justice. And I think I'm reading back in some of the most difficult time in his political career, which was in the 1960s. But I would say that he was one of the most one of the things that people don't recognize enough about him. He was one of the greatest developmentalists that I've ever seen. Even in British Guyana, at a time when we had so much problems, his achievements is not insignificant. The things that he achieved for Guyana, and they were all achieved in trying to help to develop the human capital within the state itself. I mean, British Guyana, one of the achievements I think is the fact that British Guyana was the only colony that ever developed a university on its own.
Oh, wow.
While we were still a colony, the University of Guyana was built by H.E Jagan while we were still a colony. He built also the Guyana School of Agriculture because he recognized the importance of agriculture, and he wanted it done on a scientific basis. He was very important in helping to build a national industry by creating industrial parks and doing studies, the government expense doing studies, sharing it with the private sector to help them to invest and reducing their risk of investment in many ways. And some of the things that he did to try to diversify the economy in agriculture in particular were remarkable. Nowadays, a lot of countries might reject some of them, but I still remember as a boy when we used to be in this country with such rich soil and land, we used to be importing peanuts and cabbages and carrots and all of these type of things.
Wow.
And on the Jagan, we became exporter of coffee, and we started to produce a lot of these things. So I think he was a remarkable man in every aspect. He was a great developmentalist. He was a strong political fighter for justice and freedom. He led some of the biggest battles in the period of the colonial period. He was the only leader of a colonial country that addressed the United Nations colonial committee that they had in the 60s.
Why is it that the world doesn't know enough about him? Has it been a lack of will from Guyana, or has it been a lack of know-how of how to get the message?
I suppose that Guyana is a small country, and economically it hasn't been doing well for a long time after the government changed in 1964. So Guyana was merely more or less off the map for a long time. So nobody actually. But although at one time in his career, I just read an article actually that was published in 1963. But it was I think it's either Washington Post or one of the prominent newspapers in the United States, where they were speaking about him and his struggles. And one of the passages I remember in my head is when they said, "Who knows who's the president of Brazil? Who knows who's the president of Argentina? But everybody knows who H.E Jagan is because of the kind of struggle that he waged, the anti-colonial struggle that he waged in that time. This very small country of ours." So he was not only he was a remarkable man, but he probably had good taste in the choice of his wife. His wife was a remarkable woman as well. Herself was rated by Times Magazine as one of the 100 most rebellious women of all times.
Wow.
So,
did you ever hear about Guyana before? Yeah. Or did you ever know about any of these issues of Guyana?
In fact, when Hillary Clinton was fighting to be president of the United States, and it looked like if she would have won the election, someone in the US wrote a letter that she would not be the first American woman to have been a president of a country. Janet Jagan was president before her.
Wow.
No, I didn't. Rajan, I didn't know anything about Guyana. I only got to know more about Guyana in the last 2-3 days when you told me that.
I hope that I have done enough to whet your appetite.
Oh man, definitely. You made me feel at home.
Absolutely.
I feel like I want to go and visit there. I want to see.
And I would also say this, that H.E Jagan had given us an internationalist education, that we were not confined. Those of us who worked with him were never only confined. He never saw Guyana as an end in itself. He always saw Guyana as part of the world community, and therefore we must be aware of what is happening internationally. and what contribution we can make. So some of my early political activities was fighting to see China, the United Nations, the Albanian resolution of the United Nations, was fighting in Vietnam, was fighting for Angela Davis, freedom of Angela Davis. Some of those early things, and so I think he had given many of us who work with him this kind of internationalism that is forever a part of our lives. South Africa, if you go and in Kenya, he was one of the people who was giving a lot of solidarity to Kenya and had personal contact with Jomo Kenyatta at the time.
Arambe. Hey, Arambe. Hey.
Wow. Do you know what? This has been honestly one of the most remarkable conversations so far. It's not every day that we get to speak to a president, and more than that, a person who is a dear friend. Because Donald, you've really supported everything that we've been looking to do, because your value of human first and equality is a testimony to your own personal life. So, like, on behalf of all the listeners out there, honestly, thank you so much for your time. Is there any final thoughts that you want to leave people with?
No, not sleep, but just to say that I enjoyed the conversation myself, and I hope that those who listen can try to understand a little bit more of what is taking place in Guyana and how a free and democratic Guyana can make a bigger contribution to the international community.
That's great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
No, it's lovely here listening to you. No, it's been a real insight, actually. I found something new, learned something new for myself today, and thank you, Rajan, as well. Because if you want pushing for me to, look at those two documentaries and read Donald's sitting here, in isolation.
Corona isolation.
I was going to say, who says that every virus doesn't have a silver lining? It's
no, this one has little red dots at the end of it. Come on. No, cool. It's been really, really an insight, Donald. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I thoroughly enjoyed it as well.
What a fantastic conversation. I'm sure you agree. That's it. Thank you for tuning in for this episode. It was a conversation with President Donald Ramotar from Guyana. On behalf of myself and Kulvinder, thank you for joining into this discussion. Make sure that if you do like this, that you do subscribe, and you do rate and leave a wonderful comment. And do share it with your friends and family and everybody else out there. This is the Global Indian Series podcast, your platform for people of Indian origin.